Hey there, my name's Chris, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my snare, or I'm sorry, not snare, I just did that. My percussion effects and the percussion filler for my One Synth Challenge track. So, in the last videos, I talked about my kick and my snare, and one thing I always try to do is I kind of try to fill out all those things with like a full drum kit. So, first thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the drum bus and the other stuff is um, this hi-hat. So this hi-hat sounds kind of like this. Okay, it's pretty low in the mix, but you kind of get the idea. So I'm not going to go through all the presets that I created to do this. This is just your standard noise hi-hat, synthesized noise hi-hat kind of thing. And, I've got just an EQ rolling off all the low stuff and keeping up in the high area. The one thing I will show you that I did, see the automation. What did I do? So I have a automation parameter on the synth's decay parameter for the volume envelope. So if I open the synth up, you can see that guy bouncing around quite a bit. And the reason I do that is to kind of give that, like a just to kind of give it a more human element. I do that on a lot of sounds that I'll just kind of automate something to make it seem a little more realistic to the listener. And by the way, this is all on a bus called breaks, and breaks are just things that in a traditional like drum and bass tune, you might have like a hi-hat break or a ride break, and the reason they're called that, in case you don't know, is because and for a long time, all these things are usually ripped off old funk records. They're sampled. They call them like drum breaks, right? Because it's the only thing playing. It's a break just for the drums. So that's just a wording. And you can see in the One Synth Challenge, I didn't use breaks or loops. I had to kind of create my own. So I also made this thing that I called Tom Break or Ghost Tom. Play that one real quick. So again, that's just a very percussive kind of Tommy sound. It's not the most impressive thing, but it kind of adds to the overall drum sound. And then drums by themselves with that. So that's really acting as more of a kind of like a ghost snare or something like that. Yeah, so those are kind of the two main things I did. I have this hat open. I don't know if I actually used that. I made it, maybe I didn't use it. I do that a lot as I start mixing down or whatever. I just realized I don't need it. So the one thing I didn't do on this track, and I even remember it, is I did not make any toms. And I tried to, and I got frustrated. I just gave up because I wanted to have a big tom build, and I just couldn't make the sound realistic. So my drum kit is basically a kick, snare, hi-hat, and then these kind of ghost toms or these ghost snares. But pretty basic. So this section here is called perk effects, and this is just all bust to one area, just for volume control mainly. But I have a couple of different sounds, like this one called Pick Up the Phone. So it's kind of like a wind chimey thing, and it's going to a bus that's got a space designer. And again, I'm using if you saw the last video, I've got this thing high pass filtered so it doesn't get muddy in the low end. And I've got an EQ on that to kind of give a high mid element to it. And then of course a stereo delay that kind of gives it that ethereal, super atmospheric vibe. Okay. Then I have this thing up here called Clap Effected, which is just a kind of mid-band frequency bandpass filter with a reverb and a delay on it. Nothing fancy. So basically these sounds are just really easy. If we open the synth up, it's just, again, this noise, your typical bandpass filtered noise, synth noise, and I'm just adding some effects to it to kind of sit it in the mix and make it kind of sound cool. Then I have this snare noise. I have no idea why I call it that. Probably what I did was I copied my snare patch. excuse me, probably copied my snare patch and just changed it into a noisy thing. This woof, I actually want to say that was a preset called like Bruce Lee or something like that, and I kind of changed it to make it sit for what I wanted. And then woodblock, I almost always use a woodblock kind of sound. Same thing. I really, really like these woodblock kind of sounds. And effects bang, that sounds cool. So probably that effects bang I just leveraged off of the metallic sound I made for the snare layer. And again, EQ'd it the way it needed to be. I took the 200 out of it because I probably in this sound, high pass filtering it too much. Yeah, it loses some of its impact. But so I wanted to keep some of that low in there. Yeah, but I'm taking the 200 hertz out just to make room for the snare. And that's basically it. And, you know, even though this is kind of simple, I have a ton of fun making these sounds. Oh, I made a crash too. It's pretty bad though. Yeah, it adds effect, but it's not fooling anybody. So in the mix, it sounds like. So again, I actually I have a lot of fun making these kind of effects, and I think that they actually add a lot of depth and interest to a track. And it's kind of fun just to make the sounds and then kind of just patchwork them in there. I do a lot of this by hand and with mouse, just kind of playing around with the drums looping, trying to figure out like what's going to sound really good in the mix. Okay, so that kind of does it for all the drums and everything. So the last thing I want to talk about with respect to the drums is once I kind of get my drum sound sounding good, I actually will do kind of a first pass mix down on the drums. And that's exactly what you see here is what this thing I call drum master. So what that is I'm just going to go ahead and loop the drums real quick. Okay. So that's a little bit annoying. Now I'm going to put this compressor on. So all this compressor is really doing is tickling the all of the percussions, and it's acting as a glue. You've probably heard that, like a bus compressor or glue compressor. I'm going to turn this crash off. It's driving me crazy. Sorry. Okay, so this glue compressor is just kind of tickling the bus and kind of getting the sounds that kind of sound like they're all part of the same instrument or same group. And again, that's all done kind of by ear. That's actually kind of a lot of, it's almost hitting 5 dB of gain reduction there. I probably normally wouldn't really go that much, but I do have the ratio only at about 2. That's not too bad. So, sounded good. And then, yes, even the overdrive plugin makes its return on the drum bus. So without it, with it, so you can see I'm using the output level control to turn down the output because I'm driving the thing almost 10 dB. And this is acting as kind of not just overdrive, but yet another compressor or another piece of gluing. And I think that just kind of gives it more of an analog sound because, you know, when you're making sounds with just synthesizers and no samples, sometimes things kind of get electronic-y sounding, and that's not always a good thing. So I thought that was cool. Okay, and then channel EQ. Nothing, sorry about that. Nothing too revolutionary here, profound. The main thing I'm doing is taking out a little bit of the low mid, and you know, this is one of those areas where I'm not super happy with this mix down in general because after I listened to it with fresh ears, it was kind of boxy and a little boomy down there. So the drums probably could have used a little more out of the low mid, and I probably should have done the sound design a little better to take some out. I also put this dip in around 130, around 130 hertz to kind of separate the kick and the snare and the mix a little more. A very gentle high mid boost, and then I'm rolling off the kind of gnarly, nasty high frequencies. And then finally, a bus limiter. So without the limiter, with the limiter. So that's quite a bit of gain reduction. But you can see the limiter's dancing a lot. Probably I'm relying on my eyes a little too much there, but the fact that it's dancing means that, it's kind of just operating on the biggest peaks, the kick and the snare. And so I feel like you can kind of get away with that, especially in a track like this where it's kind of loud in your face anyways, almost to an obnoxious point. But, that just kind of allows me to keep the drum level high, or the average level of the volume of the drum high, without it taking up too much headroom. So as a matter of fact, if I turn on the scope, you can see the drums don't look like just like one big sausage. It has some dynamics, but with the limiter off, there's a lot more attack element. So these little attacks on the kick and the snare are taking up quite a bit of headroom in the mix. And so by turning the limiter on, it's reduced kind of the peak to average level, if you want to think of it that way. And so that's just a really rough drum mix. Well, this is probably the mix I ended up with, but this process, what I usually try to do is get the drums hitting at about -10 on the peak, on the drum bus. And obviously with the limiter on there, I'm just running it hot into the limiter and then turning the channel strip volume down. So with the drums peaking at -10, what I'm trying to do is get a loud level at -10, and then I build the mix on top of that. And I find that with the drums at -10, if I try to mix the drums and the bass together so that the peaks are at like -6, or even, I might go to like -4, I find that is a good mix, peak to average volume, that's going to allow me to get a pretty good sounding master, not overly loud, but not too quiet either. Because the problem is you don't want to have a bunch of hits taking up a ton of dynamic range and then right at the end, chop off the waveform and then do that all in one go. It's best to kind of mix it that way and kind of mix loud. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but if you want a louder mix your sounds loud. And I think really what that phrase means is, don't have a bunch of sounds in your mix taking up a ton of headroom that don't add a lot of volume, if the whole goal is to have a pretty solid, robust sounding mix at the end of the day. Okay, that's probably enough rambling, and that's kind of wraps up the drums. So finally in the next video, I'll get into some of how I did the bass design. So until then, have fun and leave me any comments if you have any. Take care.